Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. This session on digital transformation is going to be quite a ride because we have the honor of having Nasser from Google. Nasser is quite a well-known person in this digital transformation challenges that the world is facing. He's based in Dubai. He's the head of emerging markets from Google Digital Academy, but he has been in Google for a long time. So Nasser, I think if you can give in a nutshell the background you got would be amazing so that people can get to know you better before we get started.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks, Guillermo. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. So a little bit about me, and then obviously I'm going to definitely plug the Cambridge CJBS because obviously we're, there's a sort of alumni connection there, which is super respectful. I've actually spent the last 10 years at Google. I literally hit my Google anniversary, or my Googleversary, as they say, in August. And you can see at the background there, I actually have my own personalized Google Doodle celebrating my my achievement. For the folks that don't know me, I'm sort of a very much an on-brand guy. So even the folks who are on the MBA with me also noted that I would always kind of be on brand whenever I could. But anyway, that's a separate thing. A little bit about me. This kind of represents my career to date. I'm a very visual person, by the way. I like to have like a one slide that explains everything that can possibly happen. My career actually started, I've been working for about 23 years. It started in being a computer science grad and joined a startup. So that was like my place where I started. I joined a company called Bait. Then rode the dot-com waves for a while until there was a crash. You can see that huge crash that happened. Then joined this interesting startup called Symbian, with field around developing a mobile operating system that could actually do something with a phone. And then got acquired by Nokia. So sort of experience in mobile, experience in on the content management side, and then managing handset manufacturers, which is a really interesting challenge. Then spent a little bit of time at IBM. So I always joke that if you cut me open, it'll start bleeding blue. That blue blood will never stop flowing through me. And then, more interestingly, in 2010, I joined Google. So now, when you cut me, it starts blue, then turns green, then turns red, then turns yellow. So that's kind of, that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I've spent the last 10 years really helping companies. Initially, I was in the cloud part of the business, really helping companies understand the benefit of and the cost efficiencies, which we'll talk about around cloud and adoption of cloud. And then the last 3 years, more specifically on transformation and digital transformation and digital marketing transformation. So we kind of narrowed things down from a marketing perspective as well. So that's a little bit about me. And then I'll add the MBA in there as well. And then obviously where we are today in terms of COVID and another like world crisis hitting everybody. I've tried to maintain some level of positivity throughout my career, and that's what that green line is trying to present. That's a little bit about me.
Perfect, and thank you so much. I think that's very insightful for everyone here connected. I forgot to mention that everyone who has problems with the English language, there is an option at the bottom, core interpretation. If you press that button, you're gonna find Darren, who's helping us out translating to Spanish, from English to Spanish, and you're gonna have the option to have it at the same time, the same conversation in Spanish. Let me do it in Spanish now. Todos los que tengan problemas con el inglés, los invito a que presionen por favor abajo hay un botón con un mundo, con un logo de mundo, y van a ver la opción que la presión, y va a estar Darren, que nos está ayudando a hacer la traducción simultánea. Así que los invito desde ya a presionar ese botón para poder conversar y entender de qué se trata toda esta apasionante charla. Thank you so much for that. Also, before we get started with this amazing conversation, I would like to invite everyone who has questions to put them in the chat box so we can read them out loud at the end, and we can start having this conversation that is very current, that is very industry, I would say, because every single industry is living this digital transformation. Now it's like a trend, right? Everyone needs to be in this boat in order to face the new challenges and adapt to the new reality that we're all facing. Even if you are in retail, construction, consultancy, or whatever, it's important for you to have this opportunity of connecting with Nasser, with given all his experience, to try and get something concrete and practical for your own reality. That's kind of the invitation that we would like to have with these conversations that we have been having. This is the last conversation on a series of conversations we have had so far for this year. But next year, of course, we're going to have more guest speakers at the same level, hopefully, as Nasser, to have this practical and close conversation. So, Nasser, I don't know if you would like to start with the presentation, or we go straight to the questions that we were able to gather from the audience.
Yeah, let's go straight for the questions, I think, because I looked, yeah, I think it's probably addressing those questions is probably the best place to start. And then we can start free-forming the conversation as we go. So
great. So one of the first conversations, maybe to set this discussion, this debate, is about what's the meaning of digital transformation and why is it relevant today?
Yeah, it's fascinating for me simply because there's, I mean, if we talk about a year ago, we're in a very different situation with regard to companies being on a path with regard to their from a digital perspective. And you can take the incumbents, you can take the legacy companies, and then you can take the digital natives, and you can plot a path as to the direction that they're going into. However, the sort of world has changed since then, and a lot of companies have been forced, in most cases, to really change behavior and change the way they do business. And that's at so many different levels that you could probably spend the rest of the talk just talking about those areas, ranging from from government to socioeconomic, all the way out to environment. And the overall impact. I mean, travel has been decimated, and just talking, you could spend the rest of the session just talking about how travel is trying to pivot. So we're talking about airlines, we're talking about even point-to-point ride-hailing services, which have been struggling from this perspective. Couple of things that I will raise, because I think when you talk about transformation and you talk about now, there's some really interesting things that I've seen, as in which businesses and what's been the impact of this particular pandemic as it currently stands on businesses, and how has that forced people to force their hand, to push them to digitize their business, whatever shape or form that might take. Now, I'm focusing a little bit more from this data perspective on SMBs, because I think that's probably a larger segment compared to some of the incumbents and the larger companies. But if you look across the board, across Latin America, most companies, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, have said that this is driving acceleration of digitization of their business. If they weren't doing it before, they are definitely doing it now. So that's one side, and this is from June, so this is quite fresh data, and across the board you can see it's around 80%. Other folks were already in the process of executing a plan which is maybe being accelerated, but nonetheless it still remains unchanged, and they're sort of moving things along. So that's one sort of data point which I'm looking at, and then very LATAM specific. And then the others, which was interesting, was around what businesses are projected to be almost 100%, if not 90%, digital by next year. And again, if you look at the points, Chile is sort of in the lead with 16% of businesses will be sort of digital by that time, and then moving up into the sort of different percentages. You can see 42% will be around that 30% mark of companies that are expecting to be more digital. So even if you just take those two initial stats, you've got almost 50% of businesses are targeting to be, if not 90 to 100% digital by 2021. We can talk more about what that might mean from a telco, finance, auto, retail perspective, but this for me is like useful just as a starter. So the why, answering your question, we've almost been forced into this situation as it currently stands. And we can go into a bit more, we can go into a little bit more detail, but this is for me a useful benchmark to begin the conversation.
For sure, and it's very useful too, because a lot of people here in the audience are startup entrepreneurs, they are founders, or they might be in the corporate world. So since they are all facing this, do you see any components, any variables that are important to consider if you are transitioning from, I don't know, an old-fashioned business to the new reality? Are there certain areas or milestones that you need to put into your own growth strategy in order to do it properly?
Yeah, this is another area that we've been thinking about quite significantly. And rather than, and there is no one size fits all. This is the thing that I've noticed over the last few years. Different industries, different businesses have different requirements and are at different stages inside their business. And this is the fascinating part, that you can't necessarily use a measure or some kind of stat to determine what the score is, although there are frameworks out there. McKinsey has a relevant digital transformation framework. You've got other sort of consultancies out there who also, PwC also have a digital transformation framework as well, and they sort of measure the business at different divisions to see where they are. At its core, though, the way that Google likes to see things, and I think this is a little bit slightly more simpler way of looking at things, is if we're looking at doing a tech-led transformation, 9 times out of 10, we're going to go down the wrong path. And in most cases, most companies try to embrace the technology. So take, for example, some level of automation using machine learning or artificial intelligence. You'll tend to find that the buzzwords are doing all of the work. They are leading the conversation rather than some of the more softer topics, which I think when you look at the people-led transformation efforts that happen, so this is around changing process, maturing individuals' capabilities, so training, retraining, and training people up. So the people-led approach we found has the gravitas of having way more success than something which is tech-led. The technology will be the enabler for us, and people will drive that change. And we can go to, I mean, Drucker's famous comment that sort of culture eats process for breakfast, or whatever that is. But the key point there is that we're focusing on the people rather than the tech, and we're making smart decisions about what is going to make a successful transformation at whatever level. Yeah, so that's kind of that. And then the other part that I was going to quickly mention were the areas that we try to address. Sorry, I'm going to flick around this Prezzo for a bit. If you break that down a little bit further, when you talk about people-led transformation, the 5 key areas that we see that require attention from a transformation perspective. So if it's a consumer-facing business, it's that customer centricity, it's that obsession of the customer, sort of Amazon-esque view of the world in terms of putting the customer in the center of everything. Then you have another pillar, which is around tech, data, and automation. So you look at, you're looking at different efforts and areas on the tech and data side, which are going to help move the business and digitize it. Then you have the culture of innovation. So this is the challenge. So people look at Google and say, how do you do what you do? And that's part of the secret sauce in terms of the culture within the business that we've fostered and we've maintained. From when I joined, it was like 12,000 people to now having, if you didn't know, Google's now 140,000 employees, which is insane. Maintaining that same level of culture and maintaining that same level of that same mantra of like failing fast is super difficult. So culture of innovation, people operations, so how we manage people, how we manage hiring people, that's also something that requires a little bit of attention, which will also help on that transformation path, getting the right people into the business. And then lastly, the vision and leadership. So overall, how at the leadership level are we managing ownership of transformation, and how does that trickle down into the business, and how does it go back up in terms of how are people reporting things? So that's kind of the tech-led and sort of people-led transformation, and the 5 main pillars that we use to assess a business.
Perfect.
A little bit of a longer answer.
It makes perfect sense, because even though you are in a tech company, you talked about the human capital, the importance of the people dealing with all this new technology and trying to explore new paths. So it's amazing that you have it already, that you declare it as part of the strategy, of part of the major points you need to consider if you are considering moving to this digital transformation wave. So that also got me thinking about these barriers that people might encounter. If I don't know, I'm working in retail, or I'm a doctor, of course that I need to consider certain barriers, like, I don't know, budget problems, complexities of IT infrastructures, talent. Maybe the talent is not available in my own country, so I need to hire someone from abroad. Do you see like recurrent barriers, limits that people should also be in the lookout just in case, so they can incorporate it and do their proper risk analysis before embarking into this transformation?
Yeah, there are common threads. So I can talk about some of the telcos and the banks. I was working with, there's a bank in South Africa. I was working with Standard Bank. So it's a pretty large bank in the top 3. So as an example, I mean, what we tend to do is we tend to house. So the driver here is going to be technology. And there's a famous quote now that's sort of going around that all companies now are tech companies, because that's the thing that's going to help them either get ahead of the competition or save some cost or attract the right people. So tech and IT tend to be this island that people have to try to conquer to get anything done. And time again, that is a very consistent thing I see, that people have this wild idea or even a rational idea to advance the business forward, got their plan together, they've got their proposal, they've got at the point of execution, IT ends up slowing things down and really making it difficult for folks to move forward. That then slows the change, slows the transformation, and then also sort of limits the innovation that is going to happen. So that IT conversation needs to be solved, and that does one of the exercises we do in our labs is we get leadership, the CEO and his direct reports, to build a Lego of their organization, because the organizational structure plays a massive part in how fast we can move. In most cases, it's very top down, it's very traditional structure. And we get them to kind of rethink what that structure might need to look like. Again, we're not the experts of their business, so we have to just inject a bit of reflection on the org and how maybe IT needs to be closer to other parts of the business to really get things done. So that Lego exercise we do is like a real it's like an eye-opening moment for the executives, that they didn't realize how far certain parts of the business are away from core business and the actual objective of transforming things. So that's probably the leader. There's a few other examples, but I'll stick with that for the time being, Guillermo.
Perfect. So there is a question here in the chat box that I think is very relevant given the topic that we're discussing about. What do you think what do you think about the development in the workforce skill needed for dealing with technology and success in the digital transformation? So there are certain key requirements. Do you think everyone needs to be an engineer? Are there certain, I don't know, areas
It's,
that people need to start working on or getting knowledge from?
this is really interesting. And by the way, my my final year thesis or paper that I wrote from the MBA was exactly on this topic. It was, what are the gaps? So what I looked at was all the industries ranging from pharmaceuticals all the way to automotive and teaching and childcare and whatever else. And what are the gaps for the personal technological or personal development of an individual versus their company? And where are the biggest gaps? Because in our personal lives, we're moving at 150 miles an hour, if you want to call it that. We're, you're context switching daily. You're on WhatsApp in the morning. You might be on a Zoom call halfway through the day. You may be doing a bank transfer. There's so many different micro moments that I would refer to that we go through on a daily basis. So as individuals, we're moving, we're being transformed in our daily personal lives. And sometimes that hasn't mapped well to our businesses. They're still, in some cases, paper-based. They're still using fax. They're still using certain things, which in modern day terms are, considered pretty, pretty old and arcane and need to be updated. So the whole focus around training and retraining, I think really does depend on, I think it depends on the individual, because we're living in a very different time now where you can't depend on your company to provide everything that you need for your job. Obviously, they're going to give you all the key elements that you're going to need to do your job and maybe 10% beyond that. But I think most people are actually reaching out to the Udemy's of the world. They're on YouTube, on Khan Academy. They're on different sites and different resources to develop their own skills to push the needle forward. So, and that's the reality of things. I don't expect someone to go on a 1-week training course from work and come back as being an expert in something. I think personal development is probably playing a more significant part of people's journeys and what they're applying to the technology. Obviously now, if you're talking about a very niche area and piece of tech that you need to apply to the business, you're going to need to bring in the talent to make that happen. That's a given. So for example, I was working with a telco in Oman on this specific topic in terms of what are the gaps, what kind of people do they need to hire? And in most cases, it was on the data side. And this is the other part that I was going to stress on, that most companies now are collecting data, but are not using it in any way, shape, or form. So that first-party data that the business is accruing and gathering, whether it's transactional, whether it's some kind of level of history, in terms of CRM, how frequently a customer is engaging with us, it's sort of utilizing that data. So if we talk about utilizing that data, again, that's going to require someone to come in, a data scientist, someone to try and help do the plugging. I refer to this as doing the plumbing in the business. There's a pipe here of interesting data. There's some results that the business needs. We need to plug those two together. If it's developing a client and developing a lifetime relationship with that client, we need to develop that further. So quite a few answers there, but yeah.
No. But I completely get it also. I mean, you need to be proactive in the way you build your professional career. You need to be able to start getting all the trainings, not wait for your company to pay for them. I mean, it's part of being empowered, right? Not waiting for, I don't know, for the wave to hit you, but you need to, in advance, to start getting to know which areas are more attractive, more interesting for the market you're working in. So given that, I also have some questions given KPIs, these key performance indicators, or and in Google you call them, right, the OKR.
OKR, yes. Objectives.
That's the guy who published a book recently, John Doerr, right?
Yeah.
And he wrote a book just on OKRs, how to set them properly. So given this digital transformation, how do you set the right OKR or KPIs, more frequently known, if you're a startup? Because regular the corporate world has very strict KPIs, but there are certain key metrics that we need to consider in order to say, okay, this strategy that I'm crafting now with my own team is the best, given this, I don't know, 5 or I don't know, X number of key metrics that I need to consider. How do I know if I'm successful?
Yeah, this is a common thread, and again, there's no one size fits all. Because if we're talking about a retail business, or if we're talking about even sort of a startup, the metrics are very different. So there's no one size fits all. Another key interesting point, by the way, before I answer, the whole OKR model that Google uses, actually, we kind of gracefully stole that from Intel. So Intel used that particular structure for objectives and known results. So yeah, a little bit of history in terms of where that came from, and that Google didn't coin that. We actually took that from Intel. But when we're talking about KPIs, I think there's some key things here. One of the things that we do, and this is the interesting thing within this particular framework, looking at these 5 pillars, is that we look across the business to understand where we are. And this is actually the part which most organizations forget, because we need to know where we are across the different business units to then understand, okay, what do we need to improve? So one of the things that we actually do is go through and evaluate the business within those 5 key pillars. So there's a survey that gets sent out. There's folks who then answer the survey, and they look at vision and leadership. They look at tech and data. They look at all those areas, and they grade those areas to give us an understanding of how well are we doing. And this is normally the most difficult conversation, because after we've sent a survey out to 200 people and we get the results back and we're presenting this back to the CEO, this is quite painful. It's like, I really thought, like, for example, this is an example of a result set from a particular company. I'm not going to name them for whatever reason, but when you sit with the CEO and you say to them, look, technology is actually at a 58 out of 100. And this is a telco, by the way. And in their mind, they think they're the tech leader in their space. This is a rude awakening for them in terms of them understanding where do they need to put their attention. Because this has come from the workforce. This has come from the coalface. These are the people who are putting the 5G antennas up. These are the people who are going off and doing customer service. These are the people who are championing product excellence and coming up with product catalogs and coming up with product roadmaps. So this data is the best insight that you can get as to which parts of the business do we need to assess. And then we do this assessment again after 12, 18, 24 months to see if there's been any incremental change in any of these areas. So we can go into the nuts and bolts of sort of each of these areas and talk about a particular technology, but that's not going to be useful. The point is that when you look at this from a 50,000-foot view and you want to get the leadership excited or at least on board with what you're trying to do, just getting a feel for where we are is probably the most significant thing. So you can see here, top 3 attributes: retention. They're great at retaining people. So people love the company. It's a great place to work. Management are great at lifting people. So promotions, management style seems to be working well. World-class management, that the policies and practices they have is there. So the top 3 things there, again, you'll get a smile in the audience when you're presenting this to the CEO. However, the tougher the tougher data points around org structure. I talked about this before. Are we set up for success? Do we need to make any radical changes to the way different business units are positioned, or maybe different individuals who are leading those organizations? And the common one that I'm seeing at the most is having a diverse set of people, so that your decisions are being made with the right people, whether that's gender diversity, whether that's professional diversity. That seems to be another common thread I'm seeing. So org structure, tech, and then the data. I keep coming back to this. This is a telco company I'm showing an example for. Data is one of the bottom attributes. You'd expect them to have that on you know, a slam dunk for them in terms of using the data they have to really make the right decisions and to drive the business forward as well. So that's a kind of an idea in terms of a framework that we have that we've been using. This is something I use on a daily basis, talking to executives, and useful possibly for other people to kind of at least get an idea of how we measure it, how we measure this, as you were asking, Guillermo.
Yeah, it's very important to put metrics in everything. And I think the approach you took is very practical too. So people in the audience, pretty sure can take some notes and start trying to implement it right away in their own reality. That's kind of the purpose of the conversation. So I would like to bring you down here to Latin America, emerging markets, right? Because here we are way behind the developed world. We have maybe an opportunity too, because we're seeing the future once we start analyzing, I don't know, Europe or the US or wherever. So do you see, I don't know if you are an expert, you are also are working in developing countries, but do you see main challenges, especially for Latin America, if you have read something that can be useful for people from Colombia, Mexico, whatever, that we should be looking at just to see opportunities or challenges to be in the lookout for?
Yeah, so the regions I currently cover, I don't cover LATAM. I did have a conversation with a couple of the Googlers who are based in Latin America, specifically Brazil, because our Sao Paulo office is the biggest office in the region. And they did raise certain things, that the common threads that they're seeing across the board. I looked at some of that. I looked at some of that data. And the interesting thing is that the common threads are probably similar across the board when we're talking about the challenges. There are other things which we need to consider. So World Economic Forum talks about the workforce and the level of education of the workforce. And I know the government is trying to improve the number of people at that school leaving level who have a certain level of education. And you see that in parts of Africa, you see that in other developing countries, countries as well. So there's sort of some socioeconomic and sort of government level things that need to be considered, which companies, if they don't fix, like for example, if universities aren't producing the right people, the right type of graduates, then you won't have innovation, you won't have that startup culture, which, by the way, when I did look at what's out there in terms of the companies that are doing really amazing work, and we're talking about the Rappies of the world, we're talking about Corner Shop, we're talking about Loggy, we're talking about Agrify and Olist. For me, the examples of what these companies are doing, I think can be can really maybe even help people leapfrog certain challenges that they might be happening. And that for me, in terms of when you look at certain barriers and you look at the challenges from a regional perspective, I think those are the things. The other thing I was going to mention is when you talk about legacy, it's fascinating. So let me take you on a little bit of another data journey, because this was interesting for me to dig up when I was looking again specifically at Brazil. So forgive me if you're not Brazilian, but when I started to look at the data for I just looked at smartphone data, because at the moment, if you think about what is the main interface that most companies have to clients at the moment, it's smartphone. Bricks and mortar is tough, mask wearing, social distancing, and the rest. If you look at what's happening in that space with regard to the types of devices being used, and you look at the sort of Android iOS split, and the brands that are currently like top, it starts to paint a little bit of a picture as to the from the eyes of the consumer of what's actually happening and what's going on. If you drill that down a little bit further, and this was super interesting for me. So if you look at the top downloads from an Android perspective, at the moment, I'm glad to say that the Brazilian market are downloading less games than everywhere else in the world. obviously working from home. And it's funny because commute time is normally game time for people, or it might be downtime, might be game time. But it seems like apps are bigger than games, which is cool. You can see that even the percentage increase. But if you look at some of the data, what are people downloading on their devices? It sheds a little bit of light in terms of where they are and where companies need to meet them. I can't go to the bank to make a transaction. I've got to use my phone. So Caxia Tem is the top download in Brazil. That's fascinating. That's ahead of TikTok. That's ahead of YouTube. That's ahead of WhatsApp. I think that's fascinating. The banks aren't letting people in. I'm forced to do my transaction using an app. And is the company there to meet me when I need them? And in this case, you can see Banco Paj Bank is there as well. It might be number 10. It's still 147% increase in download. So those two are like good indicators for me. And then I don't know whether iOS people have more money than Android people, but they tend to look like they're downloading more games. Among Us is the top there, which is top probably for most countries at the moment. But other shopping and retail related interests being engaged there. So if we sort of pair this back and think about consumer behavior, and then what are companies currently doing to bridge that gap and to make things easier for customers, you can see that there's some folks out there that are really doing the right thing and customers are getting what they need. There's obviously a large percentage there that may not be getting what they want. If you take that a step further and you focus again on the banking side within the Brazilian market, you've got the incumbents out there, Caxia, and you've got Itaú, which is probably, in fact, Itaú is the most recognizable brand at the moment. I think it's probably one of the more successful, favored banks within Brazil. And then you have someone like eBanks, which is a startup, which is going through, I think, a second or third series round of $50 million, and is really challenging the banks out there in terms of its execution out there. You guys can still hear me, yeah? I'm not sure if that's Guillermo frozen or if I'm frozen. Ah, you're back. Darren, are we good?
Yeah, sorry, something went wrong with my connection.
Oh, okay, sorry. We lost you. I thought we'd lost me. Sometimes it's been happening on the Zoom side. We almost did the Zoom bingo. We checked off can you hear me and all the other fun stuff that you go through. So if you look at what's happening in that banking space and you look at the incumbents now being challenged by from a startup world, eBanks is really taking market share away from Caxia and away from Itaú simply because of the virility of some of the services that they have. Most people now want to, I don't know if it's common though in Latam, but being able to buy and sell Bitcoin at the moment, if you look at the price now, it's hitting its all-time high of $18,000, $19,000. If my bank isn't going to provide that service for me, I'm going to head to eBanks. I'm going to head to Revolut. I'm going to head to the Mondos of this world, who I would say are doing, they're the digital natives out there doing all of the right things. So yeah, for me, if you look very specifically in market, I think you have this nice nexus of incumbents, but you also then have these digital natives who are, almost biting at the ankles of some of these companies and pushing them forward.
Perfect. And before we dive into the questions that people drop here in the chat box, I have one final question, and I would like to project this or forecast this into the future to see what are the hot tendencies today. So for instance, in the last webinar, we're talking about the disruption of the drones in the distribution channels. We're talking about 3D printing. Do you see any like hot industries or hot tendencies that that people here in the audience today should be investigating for, getting more information about, that might help them craft the future for their own industries?
Yeah, and there are some key things. There's 5 key things here, and I talked a little bit about the current situation forcing people's hand at the moment, which is, I've crossed out the new normal because that's a phrase that's being used so frequently now that it's almost as infuriating as 5G or as some of the other like topical things. US election, that's another one which is sort of like grinding my gears a little bit. But if you look at the trends that are currently that I'm seeing and that are also being reported across by other consultancies, you'll see the first thing there I mentioned already. So this idea of connecting the consumer experience. So not a lot of companies are doing this well, and we can focus very specifically on retail here. So the example I love to give is I walk into a store, I walk into a Tommy Hilfiger fashion retailer. I go in and look at a jacket, I look at the price, I then sort of go online and see, okay, is that price agreeable with what I can get online, the common thing that most people do in terms of comparative shopping. I then go home and then I order that particular shirt or jacket online. Now, from Tommy Hilfiger's perspective, they see that as probably 5 or 6 different people doing pretty much the same thing in terms of looking. So if I go into a store and I look at a jacket, that's one persona. If I go online, that's another persona. If I then log in, if I go incognito mode, that's another person. Or if I'm on my mobile device away from my desktop, and I'm probably more likely to be on my mobile device. Those are 3 or 4 different interactions that are being tallied and counted by the company. In reality, it's one person. So this idea of omni-channel is huge. I know that person who visited me in store is the same person who did that search. And that person who did that search is the same person who came in store. So how do you connect those dots? There's enough tech out there to make that happen, whether that's using loyalty cards, whether that's using a mobile app with some kind of Bluetooth low energy tracking, whether that's using smart cookies, whether that's using some integrated CRM system, which is connecting the dots in the background. That consumer experience, if you can make that happen, it can really be influential in terms of retaining customers and getting their basket sizes and getting them to spend more, and that lifetime value will increase. We've all been there, that random email from that brand you love, and you're like, if you just knew that I've already purchased this already, or if I'm shown an advert for something I've purchased, it's like frustrating. So that consumer experience, connecting it, is really important. The data-driven part, I think I've mentioned, so making sure that you're actually using the data that the company's producing. The great example there is from an auto perspective, like I was working with BMW in the region. It's fascinating to see the configurators currently available for cars online. It's amazing. I can change the interior, I can change the gear stick, the gear stick color. I can change the internal package I'm using in terms of GPS or not, and everything. So I can customize the car to the nth degree, but the company is not using that data in any way when I rock up to a dealership. And wouldn't it be great if they had something available for me to test drive, which was as close as possible to what I configured online? Obviously, it's a difficult thing to do, but even if they just knew about what I did online, that would be a fantastic experience. So again, using that data to really help customers and clients. Practical uses of AI and ML, and I put AL there, which is a little bit of a typo, but anyway, we'll come back to that. You could say advanced logistics, but anyway, that might not be it. But AI and ML, I think the automation piece is significant. This is parts of the business which can really get it's like upgrading and up-leveling parts of the business that either are being driven by people, and people 90% or 80% of the task could be done by a computer, and the rest, the exceptions are then handled by the people. So customer service is a great example there of automating customer service. And in fact, the example that I have here from Ocado, they've done exactly that. They're able to respond a lot faster to the really juicy and meaty challenges that people are having, and the stuff that they can automate, they can really do that in an efficient way. So it's cost saving, and it's not about losing workforce or reducing workforce. It's about focusing them on the challenges that the big clients and the big issues that people have. The other example is in insurance, and this is a slightly different example that we're working with, that is using ML to categorize insurance claims. So you've got a car accident that's happened, you pull out your app for your insurer, you take your pictures, they're able to accurately tell you the repair costs without even actually having to go through 5 or 6 different email threads to be able to understand whether the cost of repairs are going to be, are you covered, are you not? So a lot of that we can automate, and they've done that very efficiently using image recognition. So I'm about, not about just throwing the words around, I'm about actually applying that in some practical way. Fifth is about cost efficiency and about cloud. So you'll hear, if any transformation project does not include some level of cloud level conversation, you would be remiss in not including it in. I was involved in Spotify's move to cloud. So we had almost 40,000 servers, physical servers in Stockholm and in New York that all moved into cloud infrastructure, which was a mammoth task, by the way. We're talking around 60 petabytes of data, of music data that's being moved across. What does that mean for Spotify? They're able to accurately predict IT spend and costs. They're able to auto scale. This is fascinating for me. If we're talking, Black Friday is coming. Now, most people plan their IT with Black Friday in mind. So they buy the servers, which are going to be the Ferraris of this world, when in fact, if you're talking about midsummer, or you're talking about when significant retail isn't happening, when you're driving a Mini rather than a Ferrari, it's actually more apparent for us to sort of downscale our activities, which then reduces cost. So this ability to auto scale when required, so we're not planning and spending money for the every day being Black Friday, is a sort of efficient thing to do. So cost efficiency from a cloud perspective. The last one I already mentioned in terms of IT, and someone on the chat actually mentioned it as well, that IT is embedded in everything, and every company needs to be a technology company in some way, shape or form. So it needs to be close. It may not be fully integrated, but it needs to be close to the business. A good example there is, classic example of Netflix in terms of using the data to understand which programs are they going to be producing next. And the harshness that we have sometimes of the cancel culture of certain shows and everything else might be the other side of this, in terms of them canceling something which is really popular, or may have a cult following and they decide to cancel it. But if it's driving what people are watching, and it's driving their behavior around what they watch next, then it's going to be helpful. And we had a chat we had one of the IT heads from Adrian Cockcroft actually came. He used to be the head of IT for Netflix, who came in and did a talk for us about how they've designed their IT infrastructure to really be really closely in line with the business, so that any tweaks or changes we make from a business perspective, we can very quickly start addressing that from an IT perspective. So 5 key things there, which I think are key.
Because what I got, like in a nutshell, is your ability to capture data in real time and tailor-made to each person that is your potential client, is the way you plan the future, because otherwise you're losing valuable information that you won't be able to convert into products that are needed for the market for your particular niche. So yeah, that's amazing. And it's interesting to going back to the other webinar we had about well, Airbus and Uber. They also talked about these kind of the same hot areas that they were seeing. So it's interesting to see like matches, how you saw it also, like interacting, how people need to be in this digital transformation. That now there is no excuse for anyone not to try and convert your company into, or to move it towards this technology reality. So Nasser, before we finish, because I don't want to steal more time from you, I know you are very busy, so I would like to go straight to the chat box. We do have a lot of questions here, so let me go straight to Bolivar Verbal. He asked a question regarding change management. Do you use in Google any change management framework or techniques, such as stakeholder analysis, impact assessment, and so forth, to help drive the digital transformation?
So what we use internally it depends. We're a software company. If you really want to break this down, because at the heart of what we do and the heart of the core business is search. And so any change that happens to search, and again, we get punched by the media, and we get punched by anyone who works in SEO on a regular basis based on the changes that happen to search. And you can talk about, other updates that have happened in the past with regard to search. So those strict rules behind how we manage search are embedded in our sort of DNA, in terms of doing the risk analysis, doing the impact analysis across the board if a change is sort of provisionally there. And the other thing that we also have is this culture of test and trace. So very similar to, Snapchat is another one, one of a Google Cloud customer, and they have a fascinating way of deploying changes to their product, whether it be a new face filter that they apply, or a new feature, stories feature, or a journeys feature that they add. They test it with a short group of 5% of their audience, so whatever hundreds of millions of users they have. They test it to see whether it's going to work, and then it incrementally gets tested with a larger group of people until it's actually then deployed out as a full feature. Netflix have the same, and other companies have similar methods. And again, there's checks and balances in place that you'd go through to make sure things happen. So there are frameworks. We're probably less, it's probably a little bit more wild, wild west, because it's not a bank that has regulation, or a telco that has, you have governing bodies and, teams scrutinizing, government teams scrutinizing what's happening around policy and practice. So with, in tech, you probably have a little bit more of a freedom to maneuver, but nonetheless, there's still, I think, enough in place to help moving things forward. Yeah, we'll move to the next question. I was going to talk about self-driving cars and Waymo, because there's lots of stuff happening in that space with regard to regulation and how quickly you're going to start to see. So California currently, you can call a Waymo ride, so a self-driving car, as a ride-hailing service. So imagine an Uber, you call it and there's no driver there, and you're like, okay, there's no one driving this thing, but it's going to get you to your destination. Imagine the kind of regulation required to get a service like that. There's no one driving the car. How do you get that approval for the state, across the Senate, across federal laws, and so forth? Fascinating.
Yeah. That's way too futuristic. At least here, I know that we are trying this driverless car. That technology, I don't know when it's going to be out there in the market for everyone to use, but it sounds like the future film. It's like a movie. There's another question regarding the data flow, because data flows throughout every organization, right? IT culture deals with it often, but business people haven't the same perspective about it. So there's a question here on How can we close the gap about the way different people thinks in data and business functions?
Yeah, this goes back to the model I showed with you previously, which, let me just move to it. The biggest challenge that we see is that most people on the front line have a clear idea of what needs to happen and why they're doing it. So why are we doing transformation? The challenge is when you go further up the organization, those folks don't have an idea of how to do it. That's because they're in leadership, but there's a disconnect. They don't know why they're doing it. They don't know why it's important. So part of what we do in our program is to try and have a very informal demystifying session in certain topics for the leadership, because leadership are expected to know everything about a particular piece of tech, or from a data perspective, why that data is important. But in reality, they don't, and they're maybe too ashamed or afraid to ask why this is important. So part of it is changing a bit of the culture and getting the leadership to acknowledge that there needs to be a better connection between different parts of the business, but they very much need to understand the why something is important. The example there would be when you have different systems managing customer information. So you've got maybe a Salesforce running, you've got another logistics system running, which is tracking deliveries and deliveries. Then you've got an inventory system. All of these different systems siloed, not unconnected. So when you try to get that view either of a client, the transactions they've had, the products that they have an affinity towards, the things they like, what have they been browsing from a website perspective, the product areas. When you start to bring all of that information together, this isn't something new. I mean, the idea of single view of the customer has been around for a long time, even from a customer voice perspective, which is something from the 80s and 90s. But this idea that now companies have that data and they can do that plumbing and the wiring, I think that's the part which, if the leadership don't understand that, then we need to spend a week with them to getting them to understand why having this information in 5 different places is not beneficial. So that for me is like the key. Like if they get it and you get the stakeholder leadership and the push behind the vision, then you'll see things happening very quickly in terms of their energy, the projects that get created, what gets funded and what doesn't get funded. So yeah.
Yeah, and I remember you also mentioned something about the fintech revolution, right? There is an Italian here who has a question about your take or your view on how these big technology companies are buying more and more fintech. Do you see a tendency there? There is a huge market opportunity. Maybe more people should start, I don't know, starting new fintech companies, following these major acquirers or buyouts that we can see in the news.
Yeah, it's a bit of a land grab at the moment. Different markets in different countries have startups that are. I think it's a little bit of an arms race, if you want to call it that, because what happens is you'll see the bigger banks responding quite aggressively. Like for example, I saw Uber's acquisition of Corner Shop, and Uber going off on this spending spree across different food delivery companies. They went crazy buying all of these smaller companies across the globe. And I think a similar thing is happening from a fintech perspective. So you'll see, and then again, if you've got an upstart, you've got a business, you've got a digital native fintech company, we can take Revolut or Monzo as an example, or even eBanks as an example. As soon as they start acquiring customers, their market share grows, and then they become a candidate for acquisition by a larger bank. But in most cases, it's kind of they put the two fingers up at that bigger company saying that, you know, we've built this from the ground up and we have a vision of what we want to do. I think there's probably more propensity of smaller upstarts that have a very specific bit of tech that's intriguing. I see that happening more. So whether it be from a foreign exchange or for FX perspective, there's some interesting tech out there that I've seen where people can, on an app, get the best rate from a forex from a foreign exchange perspective. And then if you look at some of the remittance markets as well in Latin America, that's huge. I mean, you get a remittance company acquiring that bit of tech, they can start quickly moving the dials in their favor with regard to getting smaller micropayments and costs in their pocket. So I think quite a lot of movement in that space, but definitely more of an arms race across the board. So
for sure. And thank you so much for that personal insight, because it's interesting. Fintech here in Chile also is growing very fast. We got Brazil, Colombia leading this market, and then we got Chile in the third place. But this industry, we can see it is growing very fast, very rapidly. So that's why I guess Natalia's question on fintech. So it's about time. I know they're in Dubai, 7:00 p.m. right? So I don't want to steal more time from your family. I know you've been working the whole day, so I know it's late. It's time to rest also. But I wanted to thank you on behalf of Cambridge Business Association. This is the Latin American office we got here from the Judge Business School at Cambridge, and also on behalf of eClass, which is the education or e-learning platform for executives who want to update their knowledge and be in the frontier of what's happening in their own industry. So Nasser, thank you so much for all the valuable information, your insights, sharing your experience or your knowledge with all the audience here, which is very diverse, not just from Chile, but from LATAM. And thank you so much for answering all the questions that the audience had.
Absolutely my pleasure. It's anything I can do for you, Guillermo. It's you know, it's an honor and a pleasure to come in and step in and share whatever little insights and knowledge that might be useful for other folks. And I'd encourage anybody else who, if you want to have a chat with me about anything specific, anywhere I can help or share some other, or go deeper on some of the stuff I've talked about, I'm happy to really, you know, continue the conversation.
Really appreciate it. I'm pretty sure the audience also appreciates that, because they know that you don't have time. Google is very demanding, so don't take advantage of Nasser. That's my advice. He's very open. So I mean, it's been amazing, and thank you so much for your time. As I said before, and thank you all for being here today for an hour for this conversation. We said at the beginning of this webinar series that is a real close conversation in very small groups, just to being able to gather with an expert, with a leader in their own field, to try and extract the most value possible in just 1 hour. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here today. And we hope to see you soon in the next webinar series that we're going to launch quite soon. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.